What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we are going to be going over improving the camera in our fighting game. We implemented this camera very early on, and while we improved it a few times, it stayed mainly the same. One thing that heavily affected it was the tag team matches. We were using the same camera, but a few things got thrown off because of that, mainly what characters need to be tracked. In the previous tag team episode, we kind of covered this. I mentioned what you could do, but I didn't do it fully because it was more involved than that. I want to cover the entire camera in this episode, so we're going to get it converted over to where it will work for solo matches and tag matches. It's going to be using one of the methods I mentioned in a previous episode. Ultimate goal is to convert this camera to a code class. So what I'm doing in today's episode is I'm going into my default camera, my blueprint that we have that we want to make sure it works for solo and tag matches. And what I mentioned in the last episode was we could remove the player 1 and player 2 references, or in other words, player 1 ref and player 2 ref variables. These variables kept track of the characters at the begin play, or when the camera activated. The problem with this is we don't want to track those characters all the time, we only want to track the active characters in tag matches. And so what I want to do is get a game mode reference. I'm going to do this in my use camera event. This is basically the begin play for our camera. Only reason it's not specifically begin play is because we also use this event when we want to restart the match or stream in to a different level and activate the camera at a certain point. But in here we can set a game mode reference like you see me doing. So we're going to get our game mode, cast it to our game mode type, which is default game mode BP, and then I want to drag off of that and make a new variable called game mode ref. We're going to set it there, and we're going to use this for everything in event tick and a lot of our functions as well. But basically we want to get our game mode reference converted to a validated get. This means it is valid, ready for use. If it's not valid, then we have bigger problems, so we don't want to do anything with it. See any of this logic that says player 1, player 2 ref? We want to remove that. We want to replace it with our active team 1 character and active team 2 character nodes that we're going to have coming off of our game mode. And you can see them right here. So game mode ref is going into this target. We set this up in the previous episode a little bit, but now I'm just actually connecting all the pieces in event tick here. So I have active team 1 character and active team 2 character. Literally the rule of thumb for today's episode is if it says player 1 ref, replace it with active team 1 character. If it says player 2 ref, replace it with active team 2 character. Now, another way to do this is to just set player 1 ref and player 2 ref in tick and still use those same variables throughout the camera. It's perfectly fine if you want to do that. The reason I'm removing those variables is because how I want to set it up in code, when I convert the camera to code in the next episode, I'm basically just going to read along the nodes and replace them with what their C++ counterparts are. So I'm setting it up how I know I want to use it. And then there may be a few more edits while we're in there to clean things up. But I want it to be as simple as possible to convert to code. You'll see me dragging a lot of nodes, making a lot of reroute nodes to try and make it look a little bit nicer, but it really doesn't matter how you make it look as long as it's readable for you. That way we can convert it to code. And if you use any different variables or different values than I do, just be very careful, make sure you're keeping track of what everything is, where it needs to go. That way you can place it in the correct spot with this update and the code camera update. Another note here, you'll notice that it says active team 1 character and we only do something if it's valid, or active team 2 character and only do something if it's valid. In this case, in our tick function, if we don't have 2 characters, we don't really want to use this type of camera. We could update the camera to follow and focus on just the 1 character, but we don't have that functionality yet. So we're assuming that there are 2 characters to focus on anyway, and in which case, we don't need to do anything if either of the characters are not valid, just stop running the tick function. So once we have our tick function looking how we want it, with everything that was using player 1 and player 2 ref as now active team 1 and 2 characters, We can make sure that we don't have any other references in our event graph, and when we're sure of that, we can try and delete this, but a lot of our functions are going to use these variables, so it is going to break some logic if we try and do that. So let's just go down the function list and replace any references that we have in there. The first one is set inner boundaries. This is what actually moves the inner boundaries or the closer boundaries to the character. And the way these inner boundaries work is they move along with the character, so they can't get too far away, but you can still do things like wall bouncing and getting put into a corner without being in the corner of a map. So because of this, we use the player 1 ref and player 2 ref for their states. We have to determine if they're launched, because if they're launched, we want to stop the walls from moving. That way they can perform that wall bounce, really getting launched off of that wall. And additionally, we use their positions to determine where they should be, because they have a maximum distance apart that we set up earlier in the series. That way the battlefield for the fighters can only go to be so big or so small. So in this case, we want to replace player 1 ref and everything that player 1 ref was plugged into with this active team 1 character. It's representing the active character on the team. If there's only one character, it's that character. But if there's multiple in a tag match, it's the active character, the character being controlled by the player. Now when you see player 2 ref here, we have to do the same thing, but we can drag off the game mode ref to get that active team 2 character and do the same thing with it. You don't have to always check for validity here. It's fine if you checked it in a previous function and they're being called in order, like if set inner boundaries is always called before set outer boundaries. But I like to make sure that they're always checked for validity before use, just in case we decide to use these functions at different points and the characters might not be valid. We could run into a crash, and I don't want to risk that. It's very easy to check for our characters and make sure they're valid. If you see an opportunity where you can remove it, you know it's safe, feel free to do so, but I just recommend always checking for validity before using it, unless you have a reason not to. I'm going to reiterate here that you don't have to do it this way. You could keep player 1 and player 2 ref as variables in this class, set them and use them everywhere. But I'm going to do a little bit differently in the code, so I'm just changing it in here so we're all on the same page with what this means, because player 1 and player 2 ref is a little misleading at this point since we can have tag matches, and it causes issues elsewhere as well. For example, our flipping logic, we use other player, and other player is the other active player or character, but the problem with that is when the characters tag in and out, if they had the wrong value, then they want to flip until we tag the character in or out and things like that. So I'm trying to get away from just setting a variable here, and we're trying to use always the accurate data or the real-time data. I don't want you to feel locked in or anything like that. You have options. This is just how I'm choosing to do it. But I thought it was important enough to make it its own episode and kind of showcase the difference. That way we're all on the same page. Now, most of this episode is just me cleaning things up and making that change. So just follow what you're seeing on the screen. If you have any questions about what you run into here or something I do in this episode, feel free to reach out to me in the comments or in the Discord community. We'll make sure we get that taken care of. I also want to note that most of my videos are recorded live, so I might do some edits with the audio here and there to make sure things sound right, or if I misspoke, I fix it. Or even if I didn't like what I said, if I could have described it better, I fix it. This case, I'm actually doing it all after the fact. This is a special case for the holidays. I'll probably do it here and there when the holidays are coming up, just to let you guys know, but just so you know, it's not the new norm or anything. So apologies that you can't hear my mechanical keyboard or anything like that in the background. If you're curious as to why that happened, there you go. Now, while I'm going through this, I wanted to ask you guys if you were interested in having some background music on this channel. As you see, what I'm doing right here is stuff that I've shown even earlier in this episode. You could do this on your own at this point. I'm going to go through and show all of it because I don't like to hide anything when you guys are watching a video. I think you should be able to see everything, or I should at least allude to it, that way you know how to handle it. But times like this where there is a lot of work that's very similar and I don't have to really repeat myself so many times because I know you guys will understand after a few, would you be interested in having some background music to stay focused? Because this has been mentioned to me a few times. I want to get a general idea of who wants that and who doesn't. Now we're going to go to another function, which is set outer boundaries. So this one is the actual maximums of the stage. So the farthest left and the farthest right point of the stage. You could also do this for your 3D boundaries as well. We have player 1 and player 2 reference because we use their positions that they spawn at and set a maximum offset. It's an arbitrary value, but one that we decided feels good in the game itself. And that offset is used to place those outer boundaries. So we just need to replace the player 1 ref and the player 2 ref when we're grabbing their position to actually do that operation, and we'll be good to go. It's a pretty simple one. This is a lot easier than set inner boundaries in the tick, for example. Once we're done with this, we're going to go to determine left player. And determine left player is literally going to determine which character is on the left. Specifically, this function is going to see whose Y value, which is our horizontal axis, is greater than the other. So if player 1 is greater than player 2, they're on the right. If player 1 is less than player 2, they're on the left. We want to do the same check, but with our active team 1 character and active team 2 character. After that, we have determine if camera should move. This is important because we want to know if the boundaries can actually move any more than they already have. So if they're at their maximum value, we don't want to try and move them past those maximum values. They should stay within the bounds, in which case they're not able to move. But we don't need to check our player 1 ref or player 2 ref in that function. So we're going to skip over it and go to the next one, which is set 3D boundaries. This one you might not have. It depends on if you're following the 3D fighter episodes. So the 3D fighter is more like Tekken and Soul Calibur, those types of games. In that case, we have a foreground and background wall as well, so that the character can't fall off a stage or go too far in those directions when they're fighting. So if you don't have those because you haven't been following that mini-series, then you don't have to do anything here. You can just ignore this function. If you do have it, we're going to replace the player 1 ref with our active team 1 character. We don't use player 1 ref and player 2 ref here, only player 1 ref, because both characters are on the same x-axis at the start of the match. So how close we are to the foreground or the background. And so when these boundaries are created, both player 1 and player 2 should be in the same spot, meaning that the boundaries can go off of one point, and we're using player 1 ref for that. Then after that, just make sure you don't have any other references. If you do, change them out. And then at this point I'm showing you I can remove player 1 ref and player 2 ref safely. There's no other references. We are good to go. Something else I want to do in this class that should have been done a while ago is rename this. Default camera is a fine name for it, but the rest of our classes outside of a handful are called class name BP if it's a blueprint, and I like to use the word base when it's a parent for the blueprint instead of default, even though default works. So instead of default camera, I'm going to rename this to base camera BP, and the code class we're going to make is going to be base camera, so that's why I'm doing that as well. When you rename a file, sometimes Visual Studio will pop up and give you an error or warning. And usually continue through that. If you can't, just close the editor, reopen. It'll have renamed it for you. Now if we test the game, it should work for solos, and if we are to play it again, it should work for tag matches as well. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed and this video helped you with any of those things, with improving your camera, getting ready to transfer your camera class to a code class, or just the concepts behind these things, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and it's completely free. I really appreciate it, guys, and I also really appreciate the Patreon, YouTube membership, and Discord supporters. You guys are so awesome. Thank you so much for that. I'm so happy that you're enjoying this series, and there's so much more to come. So thank you very much for all the love and support. If you guys had any issues or ran into any problems while following this tutorial, then feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you out. That's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.